In the previous video I made, the Olivet Apocalypse, I talked about how Jesus, towards the end, was saying to his disciples, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." He told them that in their generation, they will see these things happen. He also said that it's going to be the end of the age, and there was a new age to come. These ages represent the Old Covenant, the Mosaic covenant given to Moses, and the new, the ones that Jesus initiated at the Paschal meal. Some people say it's a Passover Seder, but the Last Supper, and actually went into effect the very second Jesus died. So now we're going to switch over from the Synoptic Gospels and what Jesus said, leaving off, into Revelation. We're going to start with Revelation chapter 19, verse 7. Now, before I begin, I also want to state that I didn't before. I am not a part of any religion. I have no theology. I'm not a preterist. I'm not a dispensationalist or a premillennialist. I'm not anything. I really don't believe in religions. I don't attend a church. I don't attend any group meetings. I'd like to do all of them, but unfortunately, they have been indoctrinated, and a lot of them want to push that onto you. And of course, that doesn't work. And after that, it's very uncomfortable. And unfortunately, in my past dealing with them, it was better just not to go. I really liked the people, but I really wasn't learning anything. I was just being conditioned like they were conditioned. And I'm not here to do that. I retired about 2 years ago, and I started reading the Bible, and I started studying. I started studying it from a historical perspective, a more factual. So what I wanted to bring you was something that I continue to see. When I read the New Testament, I keep seeing the same things over and over again. I'm coming. The end is near. All the things that I brought up last time. And I see this transition. Now, there's a lot of hang-ups with what he said. Obviously, people say, well, how could it be a new heavens, new earth when we have war and we have pain and suffering? Well, that can actually be a part of it. You have to understand that God and Christ have nothing to do with religion and theology and really everybody. Just like the Jews, just because you're Jewish doesn't mean you are going to go to heaven to be with God. You had to have a relationship with God and have faith. And it's the exact same way today. You have to have a relationship with God through prayer. And you have to have faith. Having faith in the words that Christ said. If you take that position, you'll see what I'm going to present to you a lot easier. Even myself, somebody who basically, for all intents and purposes, was on the moon. And someone handed me a Bible and I read it. And I just read it without any influence. Obviously, through TV, through just the environment, being in America, we're exposed to all these things and our ideas of what the Bible says, the future coming of Christ. But I found none of that. Absolutely none of it. My position would put me in the preterist zone. I really don't know what that is because I've avoided talking or watching any videos or reading any literature on preterism because I don't want it to get into my head and convolute my way of thinking. I just want to read the Bible. I just want to read what it says. And this is what I found, and this is what I'd like to present to you. So, we're going from the Synoptic Gospels into Revelation 19:7. It says, "Let us rejoice and be glad and give glory to him, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready." Now this part is the part where they actually are going to have the marriage of the Lamb. And you'll see that in Matthew 25, when they say, you have the 10 virgins. Also the 10 virgins, who says that they're all women? In Revelation 7 and 14, or actually in Revelation 14, they talk about they were virgins for they not have been defiled with women. So these people that were waiting were not necessarily women. They were waiting for the bridegroom. Well, men wait for the bridegroom. And while they're waiting for the bridegroom, they're going in to the wedding feast. The 5 that went to get more oil came back and they knocked on the door, and Jesus said, "I don't know you. Depart from me," because they weren't prepared. They didn't have enough oil for their lamps. They didn't have their wedding clothes on. So this kind of transfers over in the Revelation 19:7. We have the spot where there's the actual wedding feast. So it seems as though the wedding feast did take place. More than likely, the ceremony was a marriage between the covenant Christ made and him. He's marrying the covenant. He's becoming one with the covenant. Just like our marriage, when you get married, you become one with your spouse. Now, if that doesn't work for you, you can go ahead and skip to Revelation 20 and verse 11. And I'm going to read that. "Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne. And books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged from the things which were written in the books according to their deeds. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them. And they were judged, everyone according to their deeds. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire." So you can see where we're switching over from the Synoptic Gospels and into the judgment. Now in chapter 25 of Matthew, they talk about the judgment and how Jesus is going to separate the goats from the sheep. Now, if you read in Revelation, there's actually a first resurrection, but the second resurrection hasn't happened yet. You also notice in Revelation 20:11, what I just read, everybody's dead. There's no one alive in this scenario. They're all dead. The sea gave up the dead. From what I could tell, this may be every single person that has died on earth from the beginning of time, Adam and Eve, to the final day, whenever that is. Now again, if you get caught up on details, it distracts you so much that you can't really come to any conclusion. So I'm just taking the details away. I'm just taking what Christ said and I'm transferring it over to Revelation. Now here's the important part. Again, Jesus said, heaven and earth is going to pass away, There's a lot of people that say it's not going to come until he comes back. But Jesus said he was going to come back. And you have to make the decision as a disciple. Are you going to believe what's written in Scripture? Or are you going to say, well, there's no factual evidence, so therefore it didn't happen? The entire theme of the New Testament, as far as I can tell, is faith. Faith will make you well. Faith will cure you. Faith will bring you back from the dead or sleeping, like Lazarus. Over time, people couldn't prove that Jesus came back. So what did they do? They spiritualized it. They said, well, he came back spiritually. Or he's going to come back in the future. He's coming back. He's going to come back any day now. Every generation, he's going to come back any day. It's going to be, Israel's going to do this. And they started coming up with all kinds of radical conclusions based on passages that have absolutely nothing to do with what Jesus said. What is being said here is very simple to understand. It's very easy to read. It's very easy to compare. And what Jesus says, make no mistake, it's literal. It's what he's saying. He's not tricking you. The New Testament is very honest. Not only are you hearing about the parables, but then you're hearing about how the parable works. You're being read in. You're being led into the inner circle and being told what it says. Now, if the old age has passed away, and the new age, which is to come after the old age, according to Christ, is the age of the new covenant. There was an overlap for a generation, let's say 30 to 40 years. Around the time of the temple destruction is the end of the old covenant age. Now we have the new covenant age. So in Revelation 21, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people. And God himself will be among them, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning, crying, or pain. The first things have passed away. And he who sits on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. And he said, write, for these words are faithful and true. Then he said to me, this is John, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give to the one who thirsts from the spring of the water of life without cost. He who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. Now, this is very important. The way he's describing this new heaven and new earth. Well, where is new heaven, new earth? I did another video, and I've recently started to realize what's so important about Luke chapter 17, verses 20 and 21. Jesus said to the Pharisees, you won't see the kingdom of heaven come. When they asked him when it will come, you won't see it visually. You won't say it's over here or it's over there. Jesus said, behold, the kingdom of heaven is inside of you. It's entos. And I argued in that video that And tos has only been used to describe inside throughout all of Greek literature. Not once has it ever been used to describe anything else. The Old Testament, the Greek Septuagints, the LXX, and the New Testament. People want to argue that there's no way Jesus could be saying the kingdom of heaven is inside of the Pharisees. Well, that's just not true. A Pharisee could repent, and the Bible does show that these Pharisees do repent. A scribe, Jesus said, after he asked him what's the greatest commandment, he said, well spoken, Rabbi. And Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is not far from you. These people are starting to see the light and they're repenting. So the kingdom of heaven dwelling inside of you secretly is what that verse is saying to some effect. And here you can see they use the word in verse 3, tabernacle. Now, why would a temporary place, which is a tent, used around the time of Moses, be among men? Also, men. If everything happens the way people say it's going to, the common belief amongst religion is, if the world ends, are we still human beings? I can't really answer that question, but I think not. Because here he's saying amongst men. Now, men in Greek is actually a human. So the world's going to end. You're going to be raptured. Somehow you're going to change into something, a ghost, go up to heaven. Jesus is going to come back, destroy the whole world, and then we're all going to come back and we're going to be human beings again? Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? And why would there be a tabernacle? This is a lot like Revelation 7:14, where people from the tribulation, if you recall, are dead and they come up. And the same thing is happening. It's a tabernacle, but there God is on his throne. And when I hear tabernacle, I'm hearing of a temporary event, something temporary. And God here is putting his tabernacle over his believers. God does not dwell in temples made with hands. So from heaven, individually, at some point in time, for his faithful, for people he has a relationship with, people that pray to him, people that ask for his advice and follow his commandments, at some point, and I'm attesting this to my own experience, puts his tabernacle over that person, and he dwells with them personally. And at this point, if Jesus, if the term is correct, defeated death, well, death just means you don't have to die a second death. Jesus accomplished that on the cross, and he gave the kingdom back to God. So now here, I contend that the heaven and new earth is this temporary tabernacle that's over you, and God himself dwells with you. Now, you'll also notice that Revelation is mostly Jesus, but this is the John speaking to angels and Christ in the beginning. A lot of people get hung up on these words: mourning, crying, pain, death. Well, if you think about it for a second, if you're a disciple and you've been written in the book of life, you're not going to die. Not a hair on your head will perish, but you will gain your life. So did he not end death? He will wipe every tear from their eye. There will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning. In the Greek, that can mean many things. Grief, sorrow, crying, and pain can also mean toil, distress, suffering, and anguish. So there's a lot of different aspects. Most people can't relate to the Bible and what it's saying. But as I was looking to this, I can relate to it. when I look at these, I say, that could also be true. Because that's what's happened to me. My life is the same, but everything's changed. Everything. And you also notice that, also in Revelation 7, there's a spring of the water without cost. Now, an angel was showing John this new heaven and new earth coming down out of heaven. If you go to chapter 21:10, you'll see now he's being taken in the spirit to a great and high mountain. So where was he before? Doesn't really say, but he was somewhere. But now he's being taken to a great and high mountain, elevated. And he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem. Not New Jerusalem, like in chapter 1, or chapter 21, verse 1, but just Jerusalem. These are two different aspects of the new heavens and new earth. I believe chapter 21, verse 1, is the new earth. It's a temple that's invisible, that dwells inside believers, coming down out of heaven. So we had that temporary heaven where the people of the tribulation were going. Now, some sort of new heaven has moved into place. A lot of people joke, well, I don't see it. I've been flying on airplanes and haven't crashed into it. Well, that could mean lots of different things. This is a spiritual thing. If you notice, and I'll continue to read, the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. And it started talking about costly stone and clear gold, refined, and the names of the 12 tribes of the son of Israel on all the gates. This is the covenant that Jesus gave to us, but it's being visualized. It's expensive. It's big. It has things like, instead of a spring, it has a river. It's not a spring, it's a river now. This is the place you go to when you die, if you are in the book of life, if you are a disciple of the words of Christ. And you notice there's gates on all sides, donating that it's open to everybody. No more sea means no more division. There's no more Jew and then everyone else. Because that's how some of them looked at him. You had the land, which was the Jew, and then you had the sea, the unknown. But now everyone's the same. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter where you're from. If you accept Christ on his terms, and you start a relationship with God, you will become a wild olive branch that's grafted onto the tree, which is known as Israel. And this is where you will go when you pass away. You won't die a second death. You'll be with God in heaven for eternity. And it talks about how there's stones and it's valuable. And in verse 22, I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb are its temple. And the city had no need of the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God has illuminated it, and its lamp is the Lamb. I want you to pay attention to this part. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. In the daytime, for there will be no night there, its gates will never be closed. And they will bring their glory and honor of the nations into it, and nothing unclean, and no one who practices abomination and lying shall ever come into it, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. And then in chapter 22, they go on to talk about, then he showed me a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb. And I won't read all of it. You can read it. This is verse 20, chapter 22 of Revelation. It's the last chapter. I want to go back to chapter 21, verse 24. Now again, everyone's preconceived notion is that the earth is going to be wiped clean. God's going to make everything new. Well, if you look at the Old Testament, I'm sorry I don't have a reference here, I forgot. But to make all things new is donating a new covenant. In the Old Testament, the Jews were waiting for the Messiah because the Messiah was going to bring in a new heavens, a new earth, a new age. And that's what they're waiting for, because what they had was temporary. The tabernacle, the temple, it was all temporary. And they were convinced that heaven on earth was going to come. Well, how wrong they were. Just like today. Everyone thinks this is going to happen or that's going to happen. But they're wrong as well. It doesn't say anything like that. Look at it. It doesn't mean anything else. It doesn't say anything else. If Christ is the Messiah and God cannot lie, then how could this not have happened? It's impossible. The only thing that's going to bridge yourself from what he said is your faith. What he says, you're going to say, I trust Christ. There's no proof, but that is what I believe because he said so. And that's what it takes. And once you have that mindset, things like this will start to make a lot more sense to you. All these people that say the kingdom of heaven is not here. Look at all the wars. They can't relate to what this is saying. They can't see it, and they're being held from it. They're being held back. The Bible represents something inside of us that's happening. It bears witness to what's happening inside of us. That's when we read it and it touches us. That's because something that you couldn't define was defined for you. It's almost like deja vu. When I read this and I went over it time and time again, I realized that this has taken place probably around 70 AD. But this is here now. This tabernacle is amongst us here on earth. There's nothing that says we're going to dwell on earth. Nothing. Everyone gets that from, I'm going to make all things new. It doesn't say that. New on earth. What is that referring to? Again, that's the new covenant. Making all things new. And that's what the Jews were waiting for. That's what they're waiting for Christ to do. To make all things new. They thought they were going to kill off their enemies and they were going to reign on this earth. But they were mistaken. Just like today. If the earth was destroyed like the common popular theological belief is, everything's going to be destroyed, then we're going to come back. If there's a new heaven and new earth, how come the nations will walk by its light? How will there be kings on earth? There won't be any kings. A lot of people say, well, there's going to be districts and everyone's going to be a king, and that's not what this means. Again, they're wrong. That's not what this means. What this is saying is the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. The nations are people, us, everybody, black, white, male, female. This is what makes up the nations, people. Human beings are nations. Kings of the earth are presidents. And there are some places that do have kings. And I have to say they're not doing a very good job of this. In the daytime, there will be no night there. Its gates will never be locked, which means while you're on earth, you always have an opportunity to enter the gates of heaven. They're never locked. You can go into it, but nothing unclean can go into it. You'll see a huge contrast between the two. They're not the same. They're completely different. The new heavens, new earth is here now on earth. The Jerusalem is where God is. It came down into position some way, spiritually. Now, another thing I want to bring up is you'll see Jesus saying, I am coming quickly. Things are soon to take place. And I said in the other video that it doesn't really matter when the Gospels were actually written and distributed. It's when it was conceived. It was conceived with the words of Christ, which we know were spoken around AD 30. Revelation was written before the temple's destruction, before 66 AD. There are so many proof points or timestamps inside of Revelation. For one, the churches. Those churches aren't around anymore. Some people contend a couple are around, but they're not on earth anymore as they were. You have John measuring the temple, and you have references to Nero. Pretty simple. Jesus said he's coming quickly. Jesus said he's going to remove lampstands from churches, and I counted them. Jesus said he's coming quickly in the book of Revelation 10 times. And either an angel or John is repeating 5 times that it's going to happen soon in some way. 15 times it's mentioned throughout this book that it's soon. I don't know how much more convincing you need. 15 times someone tells you something, it's not an analogy. It's literal. And I know that's tough at Revelation. But when Jesus says he's coming soon, he's coming soon. Again, going back to the part where the earth is destroyed and we're all back on. If you go to Revelation 22, verse 15, it starts with outside. Now here it's exo, which just means out. But the word's always used to mean outside. If the new temple is on earth, the new heavens, new earth is on earth after the destruction, after God's made everything clean, like popular belief is, how on earth? No pun intended. In verse 15 of Revelation 22, are there dogs and sorcerers and the immoral persons and the murderers and the idolaters and everyone who loves and practices lying? How are these people still alive? How are they outside the temple gates? You're inside and they're on the outside. Try and figure that one out. I know there's lots of excuses for them and they're very lame. But think about that. Think about that. Think about the nations. Think about the possibility of it being here now, heaven and earth. It's undeniable what's being said. The only thing that's connecting you is what did Jesus say? And do you believe him or not? And if you get to that point and you have a relationship with God and you're asking him for not knowledge, because knowledge dies. There's plenty of people with knowledge. There's all kinds of professors that were Christian but now they're atheists. They have all the knowledge in the world. Don't ask for knowledge. Ask for understanding. Ask God when you pray in private, what does this mean? What does this mean in aspect to my life? The Bible is undeniable. The language has been changed just to make it seem like it's something else that it's not. But this is what it says in its proper translation. It's saying that the kingdom is here now. When you put the synoptic gospels together and you put these parts of Revelation together, you'll see it. Again, exactly when it happened, exactly if it happened before this event or after this event, doesn't matter. You got to let go of that stuff. You got to let go of all the facts. Just take what Christ said, take what and John is saying in Revelation, and you put them together. And when you put them together, this is the picture you get. And I believe you'll see it. Jesus says, I am coming quickly. That was almost 2,000 years ago. And for 2,000 years, there have been people on this earth going about their day, and the kingdom of heaven has been here. And they didn't even realize it. Most Christians to this day, they go to churches, and they were told that the kingdom of heaven is not here. Well, in our next video, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to read the Synoptic Gospels for you, side by side. And then we'll transition over to Revelation. And if you haven't done it already, you can sit back and just listen to me, and maybe it will make more sense to you. But it's there, and it's quite amazing when you look at it, the way that it's written. I don't care what, this is the NASB. I don't care. I've read the Bible so many times now. I've read every version, NRSV, ESV, King James, New King James versions, Western, the Byzantine and Alexandrian texts. I've even taught myself to read Coptic Greek. I've read the ancient manuscripts. There are 5,800 different manuscripts just in Greek. There's almost 24,000 manuscripts of the New Testament on this planet right now. We know what it says. It's not a mistake. But people just don't read it because it's confusing. And you have to ask yourself, if you read any book in your language and it was confusing, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, what are you reading that's so confusing? This is so simple that just explaining it makes it complicated. That's how easy it is. So I advise that you pray in private, not on some application or in a group, but on your own. That way you can spill your guts to God and all of it and come clean. And start the process of reading if you're interested. And I can guarantee that if you read it, you'll find what I've found. It's right there. No one told me about it. I just discovered it on my own. And it's not wrong. That's what's so amazing about it. It lines up. It lines up with what Christ said in the Synoptic Gospels, and it was fulfilled. He said it was going to happen, and it did. It's amazing. People are keeping the kingdom of heaven from you. That doesn't mean you're going to go to hell if you don't understand it, but they're keeping you from it. 90+% of Christians on this planet don't believe this at all. And the ones that do look at it, I think they're the preterists. A very small number, as I see, and they are a very, very small group, and they're looked to as heretics. I don't know their theology. I'm not part of the preterist group. I'm not part of a group of theology. But from what I can tell, they're wrong too. I don't listen to a lot of it. Because what they do is they get into details. And they get into arguments. You don't need to get into details. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. It's so simple. You read, you go over it, you draw your own conclusions. Is this really what Christ said? And if so, are you going to believe him or not? That's what the Bible is. Faith.